For the first time in a very long time, the football world might have a serious Brazil problem again. Not because Brazil suddenly discovered new talent. They always have talent. Not because Neymar is back either. The world has already seen that story before. But because something about this Brazil team feels colder now, smarter, more controlled. And that should terrify everyone before World Cup 2026 even begins. When Carlo Ancelotti revealed his Brazil squad, most people immediately looked at the attack. Vinícius Júnior entering the absolute peak of his career after conquering Europe with Real Madrid. Rafinha playing the best football of his life. Neymar returning one last time, carrying the emotional weight of an entire generation. Then there is Endrick, the teenage wildcard who already looks fearless before even touching a World Cup pitch. On paper, it sounds like the old Brazil again. Fast, dangerous, beautiful. But that is not the real story. The real story is that Brazil suddenly looks balanced for the first time in years. Calm in possession, structured without the ball, less emotional, less chaotic. And under Ancelotti, that changes everything because tournament football has evolved. The teams that survive modern World Cups are not always the most entertaining ones. They are the teams that stay composed when the game becomes ugly. And for over 2 decades, that was Brazil's biggest weakness. Maybe that is why this version feels so different already. Because Brazil are no longer trying to become the team the world remembers. They might finally be becoming the team the modern World Cup actually fears. Brazil were never just another football team. They were the feeling people associated with the World Cup itself. Long before modern football became obsessed with pressing structures, defensive blocks, and tactical systems, Brazil made the sport feel emotional, unpredictable, alive. Every time that yellow shirt stepped onto the pitch, the entire atmosphere of the tournament changed. Louder crowds, faster football, more danger, more imagination. Watching Brazil never felt like watching a normal match. It felt like watching football escape control. That is why generations of fans around the world fell in love with the World Cup because of Brazil. Pelé turned football into mythology. The 1,970 team made passing sequences look like music. Ronaldo made defenders panic before the match even started. Ronaldinho played with the kind of joy that made football look impossible to hate. Roberto Carlos scored goals that looked physically unreal. Even the celebrations felt different. Samba in the stands, smiles on the pitch, chaos everywhere. Brazil did not just win tournaments. They made the sport feel beautiful. And maybe that was the biggest reason people feared them. Because against Brazil, opponents were not only fighting talent, they were fighting emotion, fighting confidence, fighting the feeling that something magical could happen at any second. Then came 2002, Ronaldo lifting the 5th World Cup. The last complete Brazil team the world truly trusted. A team with stars, balance, leadership, and structure all existing together at the same time. Cafu and Roberto Carlos flying down both sides. Ronaldinho creating madness between the lines. Ronaldo finishing everything. It felt inevitable, like Brazil had finally perfected football itself. But somewhere after that night in Yokohama, something slowly started disappearing. The yellow shirts still carried the history, the fear, the memories. Yet the team underneath it no longer felt untouchable. And over the next 20 years, the cracks only became harder to ignore. The frightening thing about Brazil after 2002 was that the talent never disappeared. Every generation still produced superstars. Every tournament still arrived, with hype, expectations, and highlights waiting to happen. But little by little, Brazil stopped looking like a complete team. The magic remained. The answers disappeared. The first warning came in 2006. On paper, that squad looked absurd. Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, Kaká, Adriano, Roberto Carlos, Cafu. It looked less like a national team and more like a fantasy assembled by football itself. But when they faced France in the quarterfinal, everything changed. Zidane controlled the rhythm of the match like he was slowing time down with every touch. France controlled the spaces. Brazil chased moments instead of controlling the game. They had stars everywhere. France had structure. And for the first time, the world began realizing that modern tournament football was changing faster than Brazil was. Then came 2014. the night that permanently scarred Brazilian football. The 7-1 against Germany was not just a defeat, it was a public collapse of identity. Inside the Mineirão, the country that once made football look joyful suddenly looked emotionally broken in front of the entire world. Germany moved faster, thought clearer, stayed calmer. Brazil looked panicked, exposed, completely overwhelmed by pressure. Even now, more than a decade later, that scoreline still feels impossible to explain. But the pattern kept repeating. Belgium punished Brazil in transition in 2018. Croatia controlled the emotional tempo in 2022. Neymar scored what should have become one of the defining moments of his career, only for everything to collapse minutes later. Every time the matches became tense, slow, uncomfortable, Brazil lost control of themselves. That was the real curse after 2002. Brazil never stopped producing brilliance. They simply stopped knowing how to survive, when brilliance alone was not enough. And eventually, one player became the symbol of that entire broken era. More than anyone else, Neymar became the face of Brazil's entire post-2002 identity crisis. Not because he failed, but because Brazil slowly turned him into something no player should ever have to become alone. At his best, Neymar was everything at once: creator, goal scorer, transition outlet, emotional leader. The player who could turn a dead match into chaos with one movement. Every time Brazil looked lost, the ball eventually found Neymar. Every time the stadium became nervous, the cameras searched for Neymar's face. Every time the system stopped functioning, Brazil waited for Neymar to produce something impossible. And for years, he did. That was the beauty of Neymar. But it also became the danger. Because modern World Cups are too brutal to survive through emotion alone. You cannot ask one player to carry the creativity, pressure, leadership, and expectations of an entire football nation through 7 knockout matches. Especially not a nation like Brazil. The weight eventually becomes too heavy for anyone. While France built structures around Mbappé, and Argentina built systems designed to protect Messi emotionally and tactically, Brazil often looked like a team simply hoping Neymar could save them again. If the match became complicated, they searched for magic instead of control. If the game became uncomfortable, they relied on instinct instead of structure. That reality finally exploded in Qatar. Against Croatia in 2022, Neymar produced the moment Brazil had been waiting for his entire career. Extra time, a perfect run, a finish that felt worthy of football history. For a few seconds, it looked like the burden was finally gone. Like Neymar had finally delivered the World Cup moment that would heal every scar Brazil carried since 2002. Then everything collapsed again. Croatia equalized in the 117th minute. Penalties followed. Brazil were eliminated. Neymar stood there in tears, while Croatian players celebrated around him. And somehow, that image felt bigger than one defeat. It felt like the ending of an entire era. An era where Brazil kept searching for salvation through emotion, talent, and memories of the past, while the rest of the football world evolved into something colder and more controlled. That is exactly why the arrival of Carlo Ancelotti changes this story completely. Brazil did not hire Carlo Ancelotti to make football beautiful again. That is the most important thing people still do not fully understand. They hired him because beauty was no longer enough. For over 20 years, Brazil kept chasing the feeling of the past. The samba football, the freedom, the chaos, the magic moments that once terrified the world. But modern tournament football changed. The teams lifting trophies were no longer simply the most talented teams. They were the teams that stayed emotionally stable under pressure. The teams that knew how to suffer. The teams that could survive ugly matches without losing control of themselves. And Brazil finally accepted that reality. That is why Ancelotti's arrival feels bigger than just another managerial appointment. This is one of the proudest football nations in history handing control to an Italian coach whose entire career was built on balance, discipline, emotional management, and tactical flexibility. Not revolution, control. The early signs already felt different. Brazil no longer looked desperate to entertain every second. The energy looked calmer, more mature, more patient. The spaces between the lines looked tighter. The transitions looked safer. Even the players themselves appeared less emotionally frantic during difficult moments. And maybe that is the real revolution. Ancelotti is not trying to remove Brazil's creativity. He is trying to protect it. Structure without the ball, freedom with it. That single idea might become the foundation of Brazil's entire World Cup story, because for the first time in many years, Brazil no longer looks like a team waiting for inspiration to save them. They finally look like a team built to survive the modern World Cup. And once a team with Brazil's talent learns how to survive, the rest of the tournament starts becoming very dangerous. What makes this Brazil team dangerous is not just the number of stars inside the squad. Brazil always have stars. The frightening part is that, for the first time in years, every major piece finally looks connected to a larger system. Vinícius Júnior is the clearest example. Under Ancelotti at Real Madrid, he evolved from a chaotic young winger into one of the most devastating transition players in world football. Vinícius does not simply attack defenders anymore. He destroys open space. The moment a match becomes stretched, panic follows him instantly. One missed tackle, one bad defensive line, one transition at the wrong moment. Suddenly he is sprinting directly at your center backs with 40 meters of grass ahead of him. Then comes Rafinha, who changes the energy of the entire attack. He is not dangerous because of tricks or flair alone. He presses aggressively, tracks runners, attacks second balls, and creates chaos without possession. Modern tournament football needs forwards willing to suffer defensively before they can punish teams offensively. That is exactly why Ancelotti values him so highly. And then there is Neymar, but this version feels completely different from the old one. Brazil no longer needs Neymar to carry the entire emotional weight of the system. That responsibility used to crush the team whenever pressure arrived. Now his role looks smarter, slower, more controlled. Neymar becomes the connector between midfield and attack, the player receiving between the lines, the player calming difficult moments, the player releasing Vinícius early instead of trying to solve every problem alone. Around them, the structure finally starts making sense. Bruno Guimarães gives Brazil progression under pressure. Casemiro gives leadership and emotional stability in ugly matches. Gabriel and Marquinhos bring balance at the back, aggression mixed with composure. Alisson remains one of the safest goalkeepers in world football when knockout games become tense and chaotic. And then there is Endrick, young, fearless, unpredictable, the kind of player who enters tournaments without fear because he has not yet learned how heavy the pressure is supposed to feel. Every great Brazil generation had a wild card capable of changing the emotional energy of matches instantly. Endrick feels like the next version of that story. But unlike older Brazil teams, this squad no longer feels built around pure inspiration alone. That is the real difference. Under Ancelotti, Brazil finally looks capable of defending calmly, controlling difficult moments, and then releasing some of the most explosive attackers in football once the game opens up. This is not the old Brazil trying to recreate history. This looks more like a Brazil that finally learned how modern World Cups are actually won. The most dangerous teams at the World Cup are not always the teams that play the prettiest football. They are the teams that know how to survive when the tournament turns ugly, when the crowd becomes nervous, when legs become heavy, when one mistake can destroy 4 years of preparation in seconds. For a very long time, that was the exact moment Brazil used to lose control. But this version feels different, because now Brazil do not just have stars, they have solutions. If the match becomes open, Vinícius can destroy transitions instantly. If the game slows down, Neymar can connect spaces between the lines. If Brazil need intensity, Rafinha changes the emotional tempo of the press. If the match becomes physical, Casemiro and Gabriel can turn it into a battle. If pressure arrives late in knockout football, Alisson gives them calmness from behind. And maybe most importantly, they finally have a coach who understands tournament management at the highest level. That matters more than people think. World Cups are rarely won through dominance alone. They are won through emotional control, through adaptability, through surviving different kinds of matches against different kinds of opponents. One game demands patience, another demands suffering, another demands chaos. The champions are usually the team capable of handling all three. For years, Brazil looked too emotional to survive those moments consistently. Now they look prepared for them. That does not mean Brazil are perfect. There are still questions around chemistry, pressure, and whether this new structure can survive against elite European midfields deep into the tournament. But for the first time in over 2 decades, Brazil no longer feels trapped between nostalgia and reality. They finally look like a modern World Cup team wearing the most legendary shirt in football history. For most of football history, Brazil represented something larger than winning. They represented joy, freedom, imagination, the feeling that football could still surprise the world. That was why people feared them. But it was also why people loved them. Then the game changed. Modern football became colder, faster, more tactical, more ruthless. And somewhere during that evolution, Brazil kept trying to protect an old identity while the rest of the world adapted around them. The scars kept growing. 2006, 2014, 2018, 2022. Different squads, different players. The same emotional collapse repeating itself again and again. But maybe this is finally where the story changes. Not because Brazil suddenly became more talented, not because Neymar returned, not because Vinícius is entering his prime. Brazil always had enough brilliance to scare the world. The difference now is that they finally seem willing to become something they resisted for years. Balanced, controlled, emotionally disciplined. That is what makes this version feel unsettling. Because if Brazil can combine their historic attacking talent with modern tournament structure, the entire World Cup changes immediately. Suddenly, the chaos becomes organized. The freedom gains protection. The emotion gains control. And maybe that is the most dangerous version of Brazil the football world could possibly face. Because this time, Brazil are no longer trying to make the world fall in love with them again. They might be trying to conquer it instead.